Okay, we are recording. I'm Brandon Polite, Associate Professor of Philosophy at Knox College in Galesburg, Illinois. And I'm joined today by Madeline Martin-Seaver, who is a postdoctoral fellow in philosophy at Auburn University in Auburn, Alabama. Thanks so much for joining me, Madeline.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so we are going to talk about perfume. So I guess I'll just start by asking, what's philosophically interesting about perfume?
So there are a few things that are philosophically interesting about perfume, and some of them have been pretty well covered in the literature. So some people are interested in things like perfume's arthood status, or what it is you appreciate when you appreciate a perfume. And that ends up being sort of a complicated question, I think. And the complications sort of point to the thing that I'm interested in when we're thinking about perfume, which is basically the way perfume involves appreciating other people. So if I wear, for example, Chanel 19, you're going to evaluate it as it smells on me, and I'm going to evaluate it as it smells on me, right? And so this means that when you evaluate Chanel 19, you are evaluating it as worn by a person. So the aesthetic experience is not just of a perfume, right? It is also attentive to the person wearing the perfume. And this means, I think, I argue, or I will eventually argue, and something I will eventually publish, that perfume is sort of an interesting case of aesthetic labor, for reasons that have to do with the appreciative practices we'll probably come to in some other questions, right? But it's interesting because it's both very private, or it's very personal, and it can be public facing at the same time, or it can be sort of community oriented at the same time. So it's like, on the one hand, you're doing this very sort of self-regarding aesthetic practice, and on the other hand, it's other regarding, right? It's sort of a liminal or intermediate aesthetic practice. So that's what I find philosophically interesting, because there aren't a whole lot of aesthetic practices that are like that, unless they're all like that.
Yeah, in which case,
yes.
Perfume is just one among many awesome things.
That's right.
We could talk about it, aesthetics, which I think it is. So you're talking about it as aesthetic practice that's both self and other regarding. Can we dig in a bit to the self-regarding portion? And so talk about that, how sort of, I guess it relates to your sort of cultivation of your individuality or your individual style. So say something about that.
Great. Yeah. So one person who's written about this rather well is Richard Schusterman, who has a paper called Somatic Style. And in that paper, he talks about, his example comes from an interview with Angelica Houston, mostly, or that's like the richest example he offers. And she's talking about how she chose her signature scent, right? And so it reflects, it's sort of like other issues of style, right? So your clothing reflects sort of your taste, right? But it also reflects maybe physical facts about you. It reflects your social positions, your interests, right? And perfume is not as literal as clothing, right? You can't write something on your body with perfume in the same way you can with like a favorite band t-shirt or something. But it similarly, like other style practices, expresses personal taste, and it expresses a sense of your own identity. So you might be someone who you might like only want to wear like really popular scents, right? You might just want to wear things that you grew up smelling in your family. Like maybe you wear the same perfume that your grandmother wore, or maybe you wear whatever perfume your mother introduced you to, and that's what you like. Or maybe you really love like old Hollywood, and so you rotate between Shalimar and Chanel number 5, right? And these judgments are, that sort of taste preference is about the perfume, but it's also about other things you value. So that's one of the ways in which perfume is self-regarding, right? In the sense that it's about expressing your sense of who you are, right? And then there's another way it's self-regarding, which is that when you wear it, the person who smells the perfume is me most of the time, right? There are some exceptions that we'll get to, I think, right? But if I spray perfume and it lasts 12 hours, right? Nobody else is getting that 12-hour experience. Maybe my cats, okay? But otherwise, it's just me. I'm the one who experiences that perfume from minute 1 to the end of hour 12, right? And that experience might be really different. Okay, so there's not just like this sense of myself that's involved in like sort of the self-regarding labor, right? It's self-regarding because it's an aesthetic practice, or it's an aesthetic experience, which the whole chronological experience is really only available to me because of the nature of wearing perfume.
Right. And so it's not like wine where you and I could drink wine together. We can, smell it and then taste it and then allow it to evolve on our palates. And we could sort of have that experience simultaneously. Maybe it's something we could share and talk about. But with perfume, the evolution of the experience of the fragrance is so long that that's not available to anyone else unless they're like hanging out with you for 12 hours straight or something.
Yeah.
Right. Which is
possible.
possible. It's unusual,
Right.
but I guess possible. Whereas the wine experience is much more condensed. And the same with, listening to a symphony, right? The symphony has a finite terminus, I guess, like perfume, but it's much shorter. And so it's something we can do together in a way. With perfume does seem to be much more self-directed in that way.
Yes, so I don't want to neglect to mention that there are perfume appreciation practices which are much more like the wine example. But even if you spend 45 minutes with a friend, and if you're into perfume, you've probably done this, like smelling the different 1 or 2 perfumes on each other, right, that once that 45 minutes is up, the 2 of you are going to have different experiences of the perfume. And so that might be kind of a feature, not a bug for you if you like perfume, because then you can talk to each other about how the perfume changed after you departed, right? Like if one of you went to work and the other of you went shopping, or one of you went to the gym, right? That your experience of the perfume, like the person who got sweaty is going to have a different sort of hour 5 experience of that perfume than the person who went to get groceries, right? And that's interesting. Like people like that about perfume. But it is, yeah, you're right. Like it's not the same finite experience. It's an experiences that overlap, I guess, but they don't totally, they overlap, but then they like stop overlapping. I don't know what the metaphor there is.
That's okay. Yeah. So the degree to which the experience can be shared is sort of momentary, right?
Yeah.
It's condensed, and maybe like, you try on the perfume together, you sort of smell it on each other, you hang out for 45 minutes and you go your separate ways, and you get back together and have lunch. And then like you can sort of have that overlapping experience and you go your separate ways, you come back together for dinner or drinks later. And then, oh, it's evolved in this way on you, and on me, it's involved
Right.
or evolved in this other way. So could you actually talk about how perfumes smell differently on different bodies?
Good. Yeah. So there's some like folk ideas about how perfume smells differently on different bodies. So like if you go to a perfume counter, the person selling you the perfume is going to say something like, oh, well, if it's a floral scent, it's going to smell different depending on what your hormones are doing that day. And I don't think there's a whole lot of science to back that sort of assertion up. But But it is true that perfumes do smell different on different people. And they don't just smell different to the wearers, they smell different to, if you're like sort of doing a collective sampling, they're going to smell different to other people in that sampling, right? So the example that I think of most often is this perfume from a Toronto-based brand called Zoologist. And Zoologist, as the name suggests, releases animal-themed scents. It's not that the perfumes smell like animals, it's just that they're sort of inspired by the animals. So one of their earlier perfumes, which has since been reformulated at least once and maybe twice, was called Beaver. And Beaver includes a castoreum, sort of a synthetic castoreum note. So castoreum is traditionally a material that you get from the anal glands of a beaver. Perfume is in many ways a very gross practice. There are a lot of butts involved. And it smells kind of like phenol. I've actually never heard this said. I've only seen it written down. PHENOL. So sort of like cars, I guess, and sort of like shit, right? And if it just smells like shit, you're going to have a different experience of Beaver than for somebody who gets like a mix of things, right? So when I tried this perfume, I tried it with my sister and 2 other people. And Beaver doesn't just smell like castoreum, it also has like some really lovely sort of watery aquatic notes, linden blossom, and then like an aquatic, a synthetic aquatic note. And the watery floral part is very beautiful. And you might apply Beaver and only get the watery floral, right? There's some people who don't get any castoreum at all. You might apply Beaver, and this happened, and you get the watery floral, but you also get like the poop part of castoreum, and that's like it, right? Like that's, you get them both together, but like one of them is a much more dominating scent. And other people will notice this and they'll be confused, right? But you might also, somebody wore it, somebody else wore it, and it was sort of an interesting mix. It wasn't overwhelming. Neither one was overwhelming. They were well balanced. And so people will explain this through like things like skin chemistry. Some of the smell experience is also just like people have different levels of smell sensitivity, depending on, I read somewhere that if it's like a synthetic scent, this might just come down to molecule size. Like some molecules are just too big to get into the relevant smell receptors in your nose. And so this is, if you smell a perfume like Beaver with other people, you get a multifaceted understanding of what it's like. Because, you know, the perfume that my sister and I smelled was not something that would be like, oh, I can see why somebody would want to smell like this. It was just sort of confusing, right? But when we smelled it on our friend who had the mix, we could see, oh, I see the sort of balance that they're trying to strike here, right? And if you just smell it on our friend who there wasn't any sort of sense of castoreum involved at all, well, that's a very nice perfume. But it's not doing, it's like, it's a very nice perfume, right? And that's fine. But the selling point of this particular perfume was supposed to be that it involved castoreum.
And so I guess this is a question for someone who knows way more about perfume than I do, is why would someone want a perfume that has hints of shit? Because typically we think of, perfume is, traditionally it was developed as a way of masking body odors and negative odors. And here's a perfume that's, not masking, but dousing you with some shit.
Yeah, good. So yeah, so part of it is that there the sort of deodorant version of perfume is actually pretty recent. So one of my favorite examples is Shalimar, which is a very traditional perfume. Flight attendants wear it. It's the perfume I smell most often on flight attendants. Um, and it's described as smelling of vanilla, lemon, and rotting squirrel. Okay. Other perfumes, often like leather perfumes. Leather is a very popular note in perfume. Leather perfumes smell like shit too sometimes, right? They smell smoky and just they smell like shit. Perfumes with white flowers could smell like blue cheese, which is not necessarily something. I don't go around rubbing blue cheese behind my ears like for a date night. Maybe because I'm not dating a mouse. But right, so or perfumes with other white flower perfumes smell sort of like urine. They smell sort of like sweat, right? And these are all traditional elements of perfumery. And they don't seem to be disguising our bodily sense, even like not just like, and these are not like bodily sense that we're like, oh well, that's not my favorite, but I can live with it. These are the bodily sense where we're like, get it away, right? We need like if there's a rotting squirrel, you're not applying the rotting squirrel behind your ears for date night, but Shalimar is an extremely romantic perfume. Okay. So I think there's the question, why do we want this is still there, but it's also like, that's been the question, right? And you can give different answers, I think, for different sort of disgusting notes. But leather is kind of a sexy smell, right? You have to figure out what what the right amount of feces is to like smell, dirty in a sexy way. Not like you need to clean the bathroom way, right? So I think there's just this like really interesting balance, and this that perfume has been trying to strike for a long time, and it's right, and it's specifically with bodily scents, but also there are perfumes that use ripe fruit, ripe melon, which a lot of people have a really difficult time with. Yeah, understandably, right? And melon is it's an intense it's an
Yeah,
intense
when the cantaloupe is going to taste great,
yes.
when the smell makes me want to throw up.
Right, good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a very ordinary sort of American experience, right? But it's really difficult for some of us, but there's a great deal of pleasure in it.
Yeah, and so I mean, I guess the issue of why people would want that smell, or why people enjoy that smell, is not unique to perfume. It's sort of like parallels paradox of tragedy, paradox of horror, paradox of negative emotion in music, right? Why would you want to feel sad in this deep and profound way? Why would you want to feel scared in this way, right? It's sort of, why would you want to have this sort of sensation of disgust for maybe 12 hours until the perfume dissipates or whatever?
Right. Yeah. Why do you want to eat aged meat?
Yeah.
Right. They scrape mold off it before they serve it to you.
Yeah.
Why do you want that? Well, it's an amazing experience if done right. Yeah. So it's how do you do it right? That's
exactly. So yeah, how much shit, how much rotting squirrel, how much ripe melon, to strike that balance properly. And the interesting thing, as we were talking about before, is that how much that's present is going to vary pretty wildly from person to person, right? That on this person, the ripe melon is just overwhelming, and this other person, it's not even present. And this other people, it's a really nice
That's right.
balance, right? Between
Yeah.
the overripe melon and the
And then,
other
right.
sense.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's, oh, well, that ripe melon really suits you. Right. That's the other variation.
Yeah.
Right.
On this person, not well, but ripe melon on you, rotting squirrel on you.
That's right.
You are the exact right person for shit.
That's exactly, yeah, exactly right. Yeah. Right. It smells luxurious on you. It doesn't smell
Yeah.
like, chores or something.
Yeah. And that's a case for saying like, you're a shitty person is a compliment. It's not negative.
Yeah. Think of like the world of perfume is like open to you. Like
Yeah.
you've unlocked this whole sort of world of perfume.
Awesome. So that's sort of the self-regarding thing.
Mhm.
But let's talk about the other regarding,
Yeah.
right? And with respect to like these negative scents and how different people respond differently. So in the third critique, Kant has this complaint about music,
Right.
and he's complaining about music by comparing it to perfume, right? This is a negative feature for him of music, which is, I think, one of the reasons why music for Kant is barely an art form, right? It barely counts of art, given his like ranking of the arts, which starts with poetry and then et cetera. Like it's at the level of gardening, essentially, for Kant. But he has this complaint, which is that music, it can hit you without your consent, right? You could be indoors and someone drives by and is blaring music out of their car stereo, or I guess, in his time, someone goes by in a horse-drawn carriage and like is playing the accordion too loudly or something. Right. And so there's this complaint as it sort of emanates from its source, and similar to how perfume, right, that you can smell someone sometimes before you see them. And it just hits you. And this is like a negative thing. And, if you've ever been around teenage boys with, wearing Axe body spray, that's an unpleasant experience for everyone else around them. How it's not unpleasant for them is a real question, but it's deeply unpleasant. And so what do you think of sort of that aspect of perfume, right? That, yeah, a lot of people might not like the hint of shit that's coming off of your body, or the hint of rotting squirrel, or whatever, right? So, or even if it's a delightful scent, right? It could just be too overwhelming. It's too pungent, right? Like your great aunt at the Christmas gathering who's just like, I can't be in the same room with her because she's doused herself too much in this stuff.
Good. Yeah. So it's not clear to me how much we should blame teenage boys for Axe, because I think there's some evidence that their smell receptors are different. Or
I wore it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And you turned out fine.
I
you turned into a philosopher, which is not ideal, but
yeah.
I'm in that boat too. Okay. Yeah. So here, right. So whenever Kant says something absurd, you have to be like, all right, well, here's the stuff that he's right about. He's just such a pill sometimes that it's hard to like, think about the stuff he's right about. Okay. So it seems like he's right about sort of it emanates from a source. It's, it's not autonomous. You don't have a whole lot of control over it. And even if it's nice, I love honey, but if I wear a perfume that smells like honey, I'm going to get a headache. Right. Or I love butter, but if I smell butter all the time, then my stomach gets really upset. Right. So this is, so he's right about that kind of like physical response, which is like, music is touching you too in some ways. Right. There's, so I'm sympathetic to his distaste. Right. And especially since so much of, if it's a negative experience, it's very like with smell, at least you'll get some kind of fatigue after a while. But that fatigue, the scent can get revived and stuff too. And then you're right back where you started sometimes. And I think that's harder with music. Uh, but Kant's objection, or a version of Kant's objection, also seems to me to be like really current, not just in the Axe body spray cases, but a lot of people like just think it's rude to wear perfume at all. And they'll like people will talk about allergies getting triggered and things like that. And it is so the sort of the manners question with perfume is, I will confess, I'm not as polite as some people are about perfume. I will apply it to my body if I'm going to work. And I have a friend who applies it to her hairbrush just so she doesn't like bother anyone with it. Like, so she can smell it throughout the day, but it's really unlikely that anyone else is going to smell it. I think she's very conscientious about this. But I'm at a school in the South where nobody else is being conscientious about perfume at all. And so you can walk down the sidewalk and have this sort of Kantian experience, right? Where you'll smell 7 or 8 different kinds of Dolce & Gabbana, Victoria's Secret, La Vie est Belle sort of iterations, right? And I guess I'm sort of at the place where I think this is just sort of like an interesting problem for perfume, but it does for perfume, like as a practice, like how do you deal with that? I'm not sure. It seems like it's a question of manners or a question of etiquette. And it might not just be on the perfume wearer to sort of develop something, it might be on the people who sense perfume, right? To develop, like, so that there might be a need for some collaboration there. But then the other thing that's interesting about this is the stuff that Kant's right about, which is the sort of degree to which our sensations are not autonomous, even vision, right? And so when we were talking about perfume using sort of disgusting bodily sense, there's a way that you can read that as what perfume can do is get you into a sort of self-compassionate attitude toward your own body. And I sometimes think that being aware of the vulnerability that is a part of being a sensing body, which bothers Kant, could be like a really good project. Like that could be a really good thing to think about, not just in the cases of perfume and music, right? But in the cases of visual art or tactile sensation, right? So Iris Marion is really good on touch as something that is collaborative, right? That it's not just individual, right? And that would be the place, I think that's one of the places where you can look for perfume as an other regarding, like how do we get an other regarding active sort of understanding of perfume, right? So it has to be reciprocal or collaborative or something like that. And maybe it's not just about sort of this sort of self-compassion or interest in your own body, but it's like compassion for other people's bodies too.
That's very un-Kantian of you.
Yeah.
That's okay, but it's totally cool to be un-Kantian.
Well, like deep down, I'm very Kantian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I'm the same way, and yet there's so much I can't get on board with.
Right.
Yeah, so I mean, the embodiment point I think is really important because it is similar to tattoos, which you mentioned before, right? It is something we do to our bodies in the way that with music, with most of the visual arts, it's not something we're doing with our bodies, and that's sort of the body is the source of, or at least part of the generation of the source of the experience. And so, and I think, that's something that a lot of aesthetics is overlooked. I mean, with the exception of Schusterman, who you mentioned earlier. So do you have any thoughts on, or any more thoughts on the sort of embodied aspect of perfume and the aesthetic experience of perfume?
Yeah. So I'm very interested in the idea that I've mentioned before, that perfume is about creating a relationship with your body and with other people's bodies. And I'm especially interested in the kind of Schusterman point. But my advisor, Sherry Irvin, has also written some stuff that's related to this view. And I think Yuriko Saito is said things about this too, which is that, yeah, the body is a person, right? Like when you're evaluating the body, you're evaluating the person too, right? And so I think that we make that, and Anne Eaton's piece on fat oppression and taste, right? I think that's something that perfume can engage too, right? So when you evaluate a body, it's weird to divorce it from like sort of the person whose body it is, right? And it's also, it's usually, we often think, well, it's really a bad thing to divorce it from the person who that is, right? That's really problematic. That's really morally problematic. But it's also pretty bad to evaluate a person and just think of them as like this sort of disembodied agent, right? If you are, we need to think about the ways we relate to each other as embodied people, right? And in the Kantian case, this is very distressing, right? There are like, you know, the Kantian can have fun, right? They can have dinner parties where you get like the right kind of vulnerable, right? You have the right food and you have the right wine and you finish with brandy, but not opium. That's too much vulnerability, which is fair. That's good advice, right? But you can also, but there are sort of like girlier things, I guess, right? And a lot of stereotypically feminine aesthetic practices are very, you know, sort of the human bodies are like mutually entangled in them, right? Like getting your nails done, right? That's difficult work and it smells bad and it's like not very well paid, right? Or you know, getting a massage or certain kind, like getting your skin taken care of, right? And you do that for better or for worse most of the time because that sort of the way your body is representative of how you understand yourself to be, right? And we think of this as like sort of a girly thing, and we're right to do that, but it's not just a girly thing, right? So Nancy Sherman has an article on the look and feel of virtue, I think is what it's called, and she talks about sort of how you aesthetically self-present as morally upstanding in the context of the United States military academies, right? It's a sense of virtue that's fully embodied, right? And it's on purpose, right? Presenting yourself this way is part of cultivating that kind of personhood. You might think that there are problems with the US military case, right? But that is an incomplete presentation of the work you're doing under the circumstances. It's not necessarily, but just like under the circumstances, right? And I guess this is all a very non-ideal sort of project, right? We're still trying, I think, to figure out how to describe the practices. I don't know if we've figured out how we should be constructing them.
Yeah, and with the military case, it's your cultivating an identity that already exists, right?
Right.
There's a mold and you're putting yourself in it, and you know, so long as you're able to embody what's expected of you, then you can express those particular virtues. Whereas with the girlier things like perfume, as you're talking about, it's much more expressive of individuality, or at least it can be, and it's much more playful.
That's right.
in a way that, it's the
Yeah.
military thing that ain't playful, or if
No.
it is, it's a very different kind of play.
Yeah. Yeah. There's certainly more diversity. Although, right, if you think about Axe body spray, or if you think about, SEC sororities, right? Like there can be very rigid boundaries too, right? Uh, I'm sure and some of that's gonna come down to like branding, right? Not the aesthetic experience of the perfume. It's gonna come down to like how the perfume is sold, right? And I don't want to overlook that, but there's a much more room within this practice than there is in some of the other practices, right? And I think that's kind of interesting, right? Yeah, the playfulness we need room for play.
Awesome, cool. Well, I think on that note, which is a good note, I think that's a good note to end on.
Yeah.
So Madeline, thanks so much. This was really fun.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I had a good time.
Awesome. Take care.
You too.